Hey, it's Chris, Liege Games. You asked for it, you got it. We are taking a look at the comparison video. The comparison video of the dungeon crawlers, of the recent ilk that have come out, that are coming out, the things you need to know. What am I going to be doing? What am I going to be comparing it to? Let's see. We've got Wild Assent. We've got Chronicles of Drunagor. We've got Arena of the Contest. You know what? Let's also throw in Middara and, a sprinkling of whatever else comes along the way that is comparable. Because even though these are the main ones that are most closely linked and related right now, there's a lot of variability and there's a lot of threads that connect them all if you're familiar with dungeon crawlers at all in that sense. And this is which one is right for you. Because all of these are very solid games. There is not a lot of mystery about these games being good or bad. But if you have played any genre for any length of time, you know at this point that all games in the same genre are not equal. And so what stands apart? What do you need to know? What is going to be good for you that is not good for someone else? All of the pros, cons, and a little bit of everything in between. If that sounds good to you, you're in the right place. Okay, now that we've got the preamble out of the way, let's talk shop. Now, I think one of the main points that you kind of have to start out with is what does this game actually entail? What are you looking for in a game like this? Are you looking for skirmish? Are you looking for randomization and replayability every time being different? Are you looking at just player versus environment? Or are you looking for more head-to-head skirmish PvP, player versus player? Also, the other thing I think you have to take into account is what is your player count? Because the majority of the ones that I just mentioned, they require, realistically, 4 adventurers/heroes. Which means that if you are doing this as a solo person, how much of that stuff are you going to want to manage? Because some of these systems have more overhead than others. The only one that really does not use the standardization of 4 heroes of those ones that I mentioned is Chronicles of Drunagor, and you can play it from anywhere from 1 to 5. Now, again, online they talk about, well, it's maybe streamlined the best for 2 to 3, but those are the sort of things that you have to wonder and know about, because if you're solo playing it for whatever reason, that's what matters. Now, if you're playing it with, again, anywhere of the more optimal amount, 2, 3, or 4, that may lessen the burden there. But again, it's how much of that are you comfortable with? How much of that is your group comfortable with? Are you comfortable being the person that always does 2 heroes in one of these games? And then how much mental fatigue is that going to take, and how likely do you want to get it out in the first place? Going right along with that, what is the overhead in terms of setup, in terms of nuance, in terms of just stuff? Some of these have more stuff in terms of it's more work to get it out, whatever it may be. Arena of the Contest, for example, is by far probably the most streamlined of these by the sheer nature of what it entails. It is mostly a D20 driven combat with sort of your action move system. It also, as a general overview, is a PvP as well as a PvE. And depending on what you prefer, you need to know that. It has more of a narrative campaign adventure. The Tenarius expansion that is coming out on top of it is just adding more of that element. Whereas your Wild Assent, now the Wild Assent that is out right now, I'm not including Levon Rising. Levon Rising is the campaign chapter-esque side of things. But Wild Assent at its core is a PvE scenario based, and there are 9 linked scenarios. It is not a campaign. Do not confer that 9 scenarios in a row is a campaign. It is a campaign technically, but in the narrative sense that more and more expectation is being weighed upon, it is not that. They are linked. You beat one, you go to the next. You beat one, you go to the next. If you can make it all the way to the end and complete it, then you win. It also has a completely different PvP where you're using, again, this is different than all the other games, monsters as part of your battling team. So if you like that idea, Wild Assent is more of your ilk. But let's say for a minute you're not as interested in the PvP. You want more of a narrative. That's where Levon Rising comes in, but you're talking the end of 2022. I mean, you could be realistically talking 2023. Let's be honest here. So what does that leave you? If you want more narrative, story-dwelling, story-based immersion along with your dungeon crawl, role-playing, game-esque level up scheme of things. Realistically, you have Chronicles of Drunagor, you have Middara, and you have Stormsunder. Now, Stormsunder, again, under the banner of Lazy Squire Games, is not out yet, so we can't really go to that as much, but that is the flip side of what Wild Assent is for the PvE, if you will. It is more of the narrative-based, heavy text, heavy narrative, consequences, actions, all throughout the campaign, but it's not out yet. So we can't give that a full evaluation. But Middara is by far and away, if you want to wager, the heaviest narrative, the most complete writing of a campaign game that is out there. Probably next below it is Arena, and then Chronicles of Drunagor. And so if you're looking for something in there, that is probably the order in which you would have to rank them at this point. Now again, Middara is mostly PvE narrative. If you want the ability to do one-off skirmishes, easy to get to the table, then Arena is sort of a good mix. Chronicles of Drunagor, if you want something, again, that has a slightly unique skill system, but is mostly, again, a campaign with linked scenarios that is more RPG-esque and does not do what Wild Assent does in terms of the Kingdom Death Monster camp building in between. If you don't want that much economic management, Chronicles of Drunagor is a better choice. But if you want some of that, Wild Assent and the Levon Rising may be more of your future desires. Now let's talk again, going back a little bit, the story progression. Do you want a highly variable story? Do you want nuance in your story? How important is that to you? Wild Assent, very linear. Chronicles of Drunagor, very linear. Now Levon Rising, hopefully going to spread that out a bit. But right now it's not. Stormsunder, going to spread that out quite a ton. Middara, spreading it out quite a ton. Arena, somewhere in the middle. So again, how much does the control, or the illusion of control, if you will, matter to you in terms of the story progression? Now let's talk about, for a minute, some of the tactical nature, the decision-making, the character-driven aspects of these games. Middara, again, being comparatively, at this point, the gold standard in which these JRPGs, Japanese role-playing games, the video games that these are based on, is setting the bar for everyone in terms of the customization, the powers, the equipment, the variability, the discovering it, the loot, the treasures, everything in that sense. So that is the bar that I would set. But let's say you don't have the reprint. You're not waiting for that. It's not your ilk because you don't like the anime style that it presents in the first place, whatever the reason. So where else does that leave you? Arena and Wild Assent are two separate, as well as Chronicles of Drunagor, ways of approaching these skills. And depending on how much you favor one or the other, one may be more apt to what your preferences are. Now let's talk Arena the Contest now for a minute. Arena the Contest is more of, and they say this is low luck, I've heard it described that, but let's be honest, it's rolling a d20 for the majority of your attacks, and you can, frankly speaking, you can miss, especially on some of your larger attacks, even your healing can miss. And so if that is of a concern to you, if you are worried about mitigation, if you are worried about that aspect of things where your ability to complete something or damage something is up to a d20 with less mitigation than you may prefer, Arena the Contest may be a hard sell, even though it has a better story-linked, scenario-driven campaign, at least at this point, than the other two I just mentioned. Now, the Chronicles of Drunagor, new Age of Apocalypse Darkness expansion, that extends things out beyond the initial 15, 16, with an additional 15 or 16 scenarios. But again, it's a one-shot sort of thing with some variability, with some difficulty ramping. But is that what you want or not? The other advantage, I guess, depending on how you feel about this, or disadvantage, if you want to kill, slaughter, slaughter, battle, skirmish, Wild Assent might be better for you. Chronicles of Drunagor might even be better for you. Arena of the Contest is battling, but a lot of the scenarios, to its credit, are atypical for dungeon crawlers. And so I've heard it both ways. There are more puzzles, there are more, mechanistically speaking, challenges to solve rather than just me bash you, kill you, take out all monsters, win. And it just depends on whether or not you want that. It has more of those clever systems, so you're not doing the same World of Warcraft quest style grind every single battle. I mean, that was one of the biggest complaints about the original Gloomhaven, right? And so it has taken that aspect of things and trying to change the mold in that aspect. And again, that applies to some of the actions have consequences scenarios in those situations as well, just as, but not probably as heavily as Middara. With Midara's like book like this of the narrative adventure in Act 1. Wild Assent, with its action-based orientation matters grid-based system, where you are literally just, the AI deck is just literally flipping over the top card and doing what it says. It is similar to Arena in that sense, very straightforward in terms of the overhead, the setup, and the ease of access to get to the table. It does not allow you, though, as much customization. Your heroes are, I mean, they're not preset. You're only getting the abilities that you're just unlocking consecutively in terms of these skills. It is not giving you the customization that Drunagor is, let alone what Middara is. Now, going across the board to Arena of the Contest, there is something along the lines of 7 different classes and something like 5 or so heroes in each class. But those classes and their skills are predetermined. You're not really changing those skills once you're given them. It's more about the action optimization once you have what you have and how you're able to interact. And again, sometimes the overhead of that, especially if you're playing more than one character, is nice not to have to try and remember, okay, this guy got this new skill at this time, and then I'm trying to remember these skills in this guy, and then these skills in this guy. No, this person has these 4. This person has these 4, period. This person has these 4, period. And that is where Arena is the blessing. And then having those different characters within the class, I mean, it slightly tweaks things. And I mean, you see that a little bit with Wild Assent, but Wild Assent is giving you at least a little bit of variation in terms of that, a little bit with items, but I mean, way less so than Chronicles of Drunagor, or even less so than Middara. On the flip side, I mean, it just depends. If you don't want monsters that are completely unique and take a lot more time to manage and interact, and you want to just go, Middara is not going to be your game. In terms of the setup, in terms of dealing with the AI system, those other games are just going to be more streamlined. And let's be honest, sometimes you don't feel like doing that. And so that's okay, but you have to know where you stand in that. Middara is also, again, heavily dice-based. Now, again, you can mitigate some of the dies. You're getting options to upgrade your die and choose them and that sort of thing. But it is very heavily dice-based. And again, sometimes if you don't have the dice go your way, you may not want to do that. As opposed to something where Wild Assent, where you are choosing an ability and it's more how much do you hit for rather than do you hit. That is the big frustration with other games like Kingdom Death Monster, where you can do a great maneuver and then completely swing and miss. Same thing with Arena. Does that drive you crazy? Then you may be better off avoiding those. I mean, and going with your Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, where you play a card and it just does damage. Maybe the modifier is slightly tweaked, you do a little more damage, you do a little less damage, but it's not a question of do you hit in the first place. And again, how big of a deal is that for you? For me personally, I like dice. So I have no problem with that occasionally being the issue. The dice don't like me, but that's a whole nother conversation. But that's why I'm okay with things like Middara, things like Arena. Talking about skills within the characters now. Chronicles of Drunagor brings about a different skill-based block system that is completely different and more Gloomhaven-esque than really comparable to its other more contemporary counterparts. Whereas we are used to skills being exhausted, skills being used, actions that have the amount that you can use them for, Chronicles of Drunagor uses a cube-based system that you are exhausting, similarly to your hand in Gloomhaven, that you are slowly losing before you have to rest and then lose one for the rest of the round. And if you lose too many and you can't exhaust any more, you're out. The other difference in Chronicles of Drunagor, unlike many of these other games, is that with Chronicles of Drunagor, it is more akin to some of the latest iterations of Zombicide, if you will, and hear me out in this, you'll know where I'm going, in that if, unlike in Middara or Wild Assent, if one of your characters is knocked out, that is not the end of things. Whereas in the latest Zombicides and Wild Assent and Chronicles of Drunagor, one character is out, you lose. Restart. Again, forces you to change your options strategically as well as tactically. But are you okay with that thinner margin of error? Where if you just get a bad break, how much can you mitigate things? Because with these dice rolling, as Chronicles of Drunagor is similarly D20 based to Arena, there is going to be some bad times where you are not rolling well. And how much are you willing to be punished for luck in a luck-based system? Now, as sort of one of the final points here, I think you have to recall and remember that whether it's Middara, Gloomhaven, Chronicles of Drunagor, or Wild Assent, or even Arena at this point, all 5 of these are being improved literally almost as we speak. Middara, reprint, Acts 2 and 3 coming out with all improvements of the 1.1 edition. The Chronicles of Drunagor with the expansion, the reprint that they are including, they are making changes to in order to acquiesce some of the criticisms that I mentioned. Wild Assent is adding the biggest weakness from the first time around with Levon Rising, the fact that there really was no campaign. There was no decision making. Essentially, it was an action economy at the camp, but your actions outside of the camp really didn't matter in these scenario-based driven issues. Arena is adding just a whole massive thing of dragons and campaign and quests and everything under the sun. Just more and more and more. And Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion, you can argue that it took a lot of the criticisms right there, went to a retail level, made it more accessible, made the teardown and the setup completely easier. And now we have Frosthaven, which is going to be adding more elements and addressing all of the deeper concerns that Gloomhaven had in the first place on a much more macro scale instead of the micro scale that is Jaws of the Lion. So with time, with knowledge has come improvement in all of these. And so again, which of these, when you're looking at them, is the make it or break it? Do you want just something completely that you can customize and go completely in the other direction, and you just want a one-off scenario every time you play, and you don't care what it looks like, but you just want to make sure it's different every time? Well, then you need to go to something like Cthulhu Death May Die, which is not even on the list of things that I just mentioned. Because that is probably the best one-shot randomization, solo, setup, teardown, ease of teaching, fun playing style dungeon crawler game that's out there. But there's no narrative. There's no PvE. And so that's why it's not really mentioned earlier in this video at all. Because all of these others are more driven in a similar direction and just have different elements staggered along the way. Which of those elements? Now, when I say looking at these games, my best advice for saying which one is right for me, look not at the strengths, look at the weaknesses. Look at the weaknesses and say, is this weakness a make it or break it for me? Because if I can deal with this weakness, and this is the worst part about it for me, then that is the one for you. That is how I approach whichever of these games I am trying to decide to back, to buy, to trade for. Go to the Board Game Geek pages. Read reviews. Watch reviews. Look for criticisms. Focus on those and say, this is the biggest criticism that I see, or these are the points that I see being made. And then say to myself, am I okay with these? The heavy dice rolling of Middara versus the increased customization, the increased overhead, the increased narrative adventure depth. Is that the make it or break it for me? Oh no, I don't care about dice rolling. Boom. Biggest criticism there? Or the writing isn't exactly perfect? Pfft, I don't care about the writing. Make it decent and I'm okay with that. Or is it I need something that's going to be quick, that I'm going to be able to play with my friends quickly and explain to them because this is sort of an intro level game? Well, Middara is not that then. You go with your Cthulhu Death May Die. You go with your Chronicles of Drunagor. You go with your Wild Assent, where it's literally just play, make sure you're turned in the right orientation, and you do this much X damage. Like, what is the biggest weak spot for you? Focus on that, and then if you're okay with it, that is the direction you run. Now, let's talk as the very final point here. And I think it's worth doing because, again, all things are not created equal. Let's talk price. Let's talk price here for a second. Let's talk, now I'm not going to go off of secondary market, I'm going to go off on actual price. Because whether you are a backer of the campaign or whether you are trying to pick it up in the secondary market, if you are patient enough, you can usually pick it up for around the actual price that people paid, because there's always people trying to get this much more, but there's always people just trying to flip it for exactly what they paid. So let's talk price per content, if you will. So let's start here, just so you can see the price-wise comparison here. Middara, if you're getting everything from just Acts 2 and 3, this was $300. The gameplay, all in, returning backer for that side of things. Let's take a look, though, at the other stuff. If you want just the core game of Middara, for Act 1, they say 90 hours, $115. 175 gets you returning all of the Epic 2 and 3 and the updates. All 3 acts, $275. Now, again, there's everything swag-wise, which is a whole lot of extra stuff that's non-gameplay for $500. But, you know, this is really gameplay right here, $275. Okay, Levon Rising. Now, if you're going to get the full thing, $450 is the all-in there. If you're just going to get the core pledge, $119. If you already have it, it's still, just to get Levon Rising, it's still $169. If you need everything there from the first one, with the stretch goals, Wild Ascent, and Shadow of Silverstream, it's $239. That's essentially what the first campaign was, I believe. The first and the second, you're really talking $369. Chronicles of Drunagor, $95 is going to get you the new stuff, $115 for the core. The reprint of the all-in gameplay, I believe, with a little bit of extra stuff as well. Dice set, so not the all-in gameplay, $340. And you can get some of those additionally solo down below. Tanaris, again, $69 for the core, $99 for the expansion with 100 hours of co-op entertainment, it says. Adventures plus Dragons, okay. All in for returning backers is $215, but that's an all in. The core plus the bundle is $235. So, looking at those, what do I think your best value is? I think by far and away, trying to be as objective as I can here, the core for Arena is by far and away the best value. I mean, at that $69 price point, that is literally almost half of the price of any of these other cores. And that it has PvP and PvE. Then I think you have to go Middara, if that is of your ilk, for the $115 with the amount of stuff it has. But again, is it going to be worth it to you? Wild Ascent, for the same, is again going to cost you, just for the core is $119. From the first Kickstarter pledge, it's really going to be more $239. And I would argue that that is probably the base level that I would recommend for Wild Ascent if you don't want Levon Rising. If you want Levon Rising on top of that, because you need the base, it's going to run you one of these higher pledges, like the 369, the 329, that sort of thing, somewhere in that range. In Chronicles of Drunagor, again, the core is 115, which is getting you really a streamlined 15 missions. Again, that's not a bad thing, but it's not going to necessarily have the variability, and you're going to have to be talking about getting some of these expansions, some of this expansion, some of maybe the monster packs or the extra heroes, as I've heard people mention. And so you're going to be looking at upwards over 200 easily at that point. So price-wise, it would definitely go Arena, Middara, probably Chronicles, and then probably Wild Ascent in that order. If money is more of your concern, bang for your buck. If not, I mean, then you focus on your weaknesses and you do what I said earlier. But that is sort of the approach that I would take at this point. So there you go. That is what I would suggest. That is the breakdown between each one of those that are heavily out there. Obviously, I could have gone more into depth on the Gloomhaven or on the Cthulhu Death May Die, on the Kingdom Death Monster, but I thought these were the most apt ones that are on the most people's minds, that are worth the most direct comparisons and have the most overlap as well. So, there you go. What's your preference? What's your ilk? Let me know what you think. If you have any questions about that as well, let me know in the comment section. I'm more than happy to try and answer as much as I can. But, hope that was helpful. As always, thanks for watching. Thanks for putting up with me. Have a great day. Stay classy. See you around.